Hey guys, welcome back to a brand new video of PJ Codes. Now in this video, we're going to be building a chart, basically a toggle chart using Highcharts. And this is just the basic functionality. As you can see here, we have two different data sets that on button click, they basically toggle between these two different data sets. Okay, very basic. We're going to be using the Highcharts API. And if you look at, if you look at the chart, basically we have these tooltips as well. So whatever data point you hover over, you have this tooltip that shows you this data. Additionally, you have this legend here that says male, dataset number 2, dataset number 1 is female, so you see it changes as well. And basically the chart redraws on click. Basically, all of this is configurable through Highcharts. We're going to be looking at exactly how to build this, so let's go. Alright, before we do anything, let's head over to highcharts.com /demo/scatter, and basically what you're going to get is this exact plot that I basically had on mine. What you'll see here is a little different. They're basically plotting both the data sets, male and female, on one single chart. What I did is I basically separated the two. You can follow what they have, or you can kind of follow what I have. Mine's a little bit more interactive. It shows you how to handle click events with multiple data sets, which is something that you will encounter in the real world. It's not going to be this straightforward when you work on these things in a professional setting with real deadlines and so on. Okay, so let's begin. If you want to look at the code, right, you can just follow along with what I have, or you can just go to edit in JS Fiddle. It's going to open up a fiddle for you. Here's the HTML, the JavaScript, and the CSS. I basically copied all of it onto here, so I've got my HTML here, right? Basically all that's here. I added some more stuff which I'll get into in a minute. Here are all the JavaScript configurations. I'll show you how I structured my JS a little differently than theirs. I basically separated this entire data set into a separate JSON file just to keep it more clean. Okay, and now what we have here is our CSS. Okay, so you want to copy all these and basically just either copy them or just follow along with me. All right, so along with their HTML, what they have here, they basically just gave us a bunch of script tags, right, to call the API, and then this figure, which is basically the chart itself. Now inside the figure is where you have a container div. Now this container actually holds the actual chart in it. Okay, and all this, basically the chart gets created on runtime, and this is all SVG based. So basically what you're going to have is a bunch of, like, an SVG inside this container, and inside the SVG you're going to have a bunch of G tags, path tags, text tags, so on and so forth. Just a word to the wise, to basically manipulate the DOM structure and the CSS, it's going to be very difficult for you to do it through custom JavaScript and CSS. You can do it, but you're going to face a lot of runtime issues. Sometimes the chart will not load on time and it'll override your styles. So basically what you want to do is work off of these configurations. The Highcharts API is extremely vast. So if you go to api.highcharts.com, basically this guy here, I'll leave it in the description. Here you have basically the entire documentation for everything. Basically all the properties, all the attributes. So these are just, let's go through it real quick, right? So here you have your Highcharts set options. And here, inside here, you have some of your global settings, like your date, time zone, etc. And then underneath that, you have your language settings and your accessibility stuff. Okay. Now this guy here, Highcharts chart, is basically the meat of it. Inside here is where you do all your basically your customization, right? So if you see here, you can add the height, you can add the width. Over here, it defaults to null. The line type can be manipulated through here. You can even add a style object inside which you can add all your basic styles. You can do margin manipulation, padding. You can even set spacing between the axes, right? So align ticks is basically is one of the properties that is is basically like it has to do with these are the ticks right here, like above the number. These little ticks, so that align ticks. Don't know exactly what it does, but you can go through it. Okay, yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Okay, go through this. I would definitely recommend giving it a good read through. And then there's also a separate, so just like we have the chart property inside the chart object, the configuration object, you have a legend property. And inside the legend property, here is where you can manipulate all the styles for your legend. Okay, so these are all the available properties. You can do so much with them. Okay, very simple. And I'll also show you guys how to target, basically execute some code exactly just when the chart loads. Okay, so that's going to be very handy when you have to do things like you know, some custom styles, you know, when the chart loads, when the DOM basically loads a chart structure. Okay, so let's just get into the actual code now. All right, so what I have here is again the HTML. So let's just go through it line by line. We've got the jQuery here. These are the meta tags that, you know, standard. You definitely need these. Here we are importing our JavaScript file and our CSS file, and these are the script tags that basically call the Highcharts API. Okay, so now let's move on down to our basically the meat of our body. Now this figure class is provided by the Highcharts code here. All right, so we have our figure class container. They are offering a P, like basically like a disclaimer section and like a description section, but I basically took that out. You can too, because like I said, on runtime, everything's all the chart logic is going to be generated through the container div here. Okay, so what I have here is the buttons. So I basically have this guy here with an ID of options wrapper. I call them options because they're like, you know, options, whatever. It's just naming convention. Now each button has a data attribute. If you don't know what data attributes are, or if you're a little weak on them, I would just recommend going and at least reading the basics. Data attributes are just basically attributes, custom attributes that you can create on HTML elements that basically allow you to manipulate the DOM structure of the host element through JavaScript. Okay, so you can basically call this element through JavaScript. You can do a lot of custom JavaScript logic, you know, without having to use classes and IDs. Okay, so we have an order here, and I just hard coded these numbers. Basically, what I could even do is loop through the actual JSON. So let's just kind of go through it here. I know I told you I basically snipped out the JSON from what they gave here, right? They basically put their JSON inside this this here, right inside the actual file. So what I did is I just created an array of objects. I think they gave us an array of arrays, right? One array of basically, no, they gave us an array of objects. Yep. So I just basically copied it. I basically just copied it and pasted it here. Okay. Very simple. And then I'm just calling it inside the JavaScript file, the index file here. Okay. Now, what I could do to get to my point is I could have looped over this JSON, got the number of basically sub elements. So like right now we have 2 objects, and based on that number, I could, you know, for each sub item inside that array, I could have created a button with the index as the data attribute number. Okay, but you know, that's overkill for this. Okay, now let's jump into considering we've looked at our seed file. Now let's jump into the actual code itself. But basically, this is just a bare bone structure. Right now, you see nothing. Right, you just see 2 buttons. I added some styles here. These are the default styles that Highchart gave me. These are my styles here, and we'll come back to them later. Okay, blank JS file, and I want to go through the exact code. All right, let's go. All right, so since we're using jQuery, instead of doing, you know, window.onload, blah blah blah, What we'll do is we'll just do document.ready, and that's going to be a function, okay? And basically inside this, we're just going to test out, okay? Console.log, document loaded, okay? And for those of you who don't know, this is basically a document.ready is basically just saying that, hey, when the DOM is created, when the actual DOM structure is created, which is this is the DOM, the DOM. If you're not familiar with the DOM, with what the DOM is, definitely go look that up. It's just basically the document object model, okay, and it specifies the actual HTML structure and all the subtrees, okay. So we have our our options wrapper, which is the buttons. We have our figure, and we have our this is script tag here that's loaded dynamically. Nevertheless, okay, so now we know that our document has loaded. All right, so now inside here, let's go ahead and I'm going to create a variable called chart data, okay, and I'm just going to initialize it as empty because what I'm going to do is I'm going to store all my chart data. I'm going to use this variable to store my chart data, and when the page initially loads, I'm going to basically store my fetched data. I'm going to fetch my data from the JSON file, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to store it in here, and then I'm going to invoke a function on click, okay? That's going to handle some of the click events. But let's look at, let's just write all this together, right? So let init chart. So this is my wrapper function, and inside here, I'm going to pass in an index, and we'll get to y, okay, and data, okay? We'll get to why we pass index, okay? Data is pretty straightforward, all right? Now inside here, so let's put a comment, Highcharts config, okay? Now inside here, let's do Highcharts chart, okay? And we're gonna do, the first parameter we're gonna pass in is the container, which is basically the HTML element that we're targeting, which is this guy here, the ID, okay, container. Let's put our semicolon. Always put your semicolon and have your tabs in the correct order, okay. You don't want the closing tab to be here, etc. Okay, and bear with me for the more seasoned programmers here, because I try to incorporate all my different audiences. So like people who are new to programming, who've been here for a while. So sometimes people will just watch random videos on YouTube, even if if you're just starting out, to kind of learn, which is a good thing. And why not learn some basics as we go, right? So I'll just kind of show you what I did here. Okay, so load and chart loaded. So all right, so what I did here is basically the Highchart configuration object, which is this whole object here, right? Inside here we have a chart configuration, right? Now we're specifying that our chart's going to be type of scatter, zoom type XY. Not really sure what that is. That's part of the configuration that they gave, but look at the documentation and you'll find out what that is. Okay, now this guy here, this is very important, and I'm pausing here on purpose. Okay, so the event object is basically the object that you can pass in a property called load in, and inside load you can basically set a function, and this function is going to get invoked as soon as the chart loads. Okay, so say you want to do some custom logic to tweak the chart styles exactly when the chart loads. You don't have to write your own JavaScript function like DOM content loaded, select the actual chart and then do all that crazy logic. Highcharts already gives you this load function, so use any logic that you want to do, custom logic, write it in here, or at least write a function and invoke that function in here like this or whatever, right? Whatever function you have. All right, so moving on. All right, guys, now outside of the chart configuration, we'll have a title, And this is going to be basically the title of the chart itself, right? So we can do height chart versus, oh no, height. Let's do, I think it was height versus weight of 507 individuals by gender. Okay, forgive the barking. And we'll have a chart subtitle, okay, with the text property. That's going to be source lines 2003. Okay, and I'm just taking this hard-coded stuff right out of our Highcharts configuration that they gave us. All right, so now let's do another one for x-axis. X-axis, and let's give this guy a title of so we're going to enable the title for the x-axis by doing enabled true. And you know, you guys can just copy and paste this from the configuration that Highchart gives you, but I'm actually writing all this out line by line because I want to actually explain it line by line. Because what usually happens is when you see like a whole chunk of code, you're going to get a little intimidated initially, right? So it's just best to go line by line, break it down for you so you understand the basics. Okay, so again, in this x-axis configuration over here, what you're going to specify is basically everything, yes, for your x-axis, right? So you have your title, which is enabled, you have your text, and now keep in mind that right now we're hard coding all these values. When you use things such as like a CMS system, for example, like Adobe Experience Manager, or any other CMS system, you can basically call in these values dynamically, right? So like in WordPress or AEM, you can instead of hard coding this value each time, you can basically make this like a template and basically pulling these values dynamically from the CMS side. So that's something you should also keep in mind. Okay, start on tick. These are all, just going to set this to true, and basically this is gonna say that okay, our value starts on the tick itself. I believe this means start on 0 itself. Okay, but double check that for me. Just go to the documentation. Okay, and then end on tick is also going to be true. Okay, end on tick. So this I guess this means basically just from end to end, right? All the way from the starting tick to the ending tick. I believe what that means. I believe that is what that means. Excuse me. But then again, double check that. Show last label, and that's going to be true. Okay. Right now we're just going through these, but if you want to know what all these properties are, basically again, just go through the documentation here. You'll be able to find basically all this. So for example, start on tick, that's going to be, well, that's going to be actually inside of your axis, right? So like x-axis, start on tick false. So again, just to kind of show you guys where everything's located in the documentation. So we went under x-axis and start on tick, which is here, and the definitions here. Whether to force the axis to start on a tick. Use this option with the min padding option to control the axis start. The default is false, and say if you want to look at some examples, they'll give you some examples here. So just you can open this up in a new tab, and it'll show you okay, basically with the code here. Start on tick, and it starts. So it's basically false, and you see that. I don't know if that made a hell of a difference, but anyway, just play with it, okay? All right, so let's get back to it. Start on tick. So our x-axis is done, and now let's jump to our y-axis. Y-axis. All right, let's do title, and let's give it a text of weight, and that's going to be in kilograms. Okay, and now let's move on to our legend. Fun. The legend is always fun. Not okay. And now let's so the let's set the layout. Okay, layout, the default is horizontal, but we're gonna set it to vertical. Okay. I don't know why I spelled it like that. Align left. Now just keep in mind with the legend alignment, this is kind of tricky here. So this just says that, okay, align whatever property you have, left, right, center. This is gonna align the actual legend box, like the actual legend parent, right? And it's not gonna align the actual legend item. So you can have, for example, say a legend that's aligned to the right, okay? And what's gonna happen is the box will be, to the right of the page, but what's going to happen is the text inside of it, like the legend items inside, will be aligned to the left by default. That's a little that can be a little tricky with Highcharts. So just keep that in mind. Okay, you might have to do something custom for that. Vertical align, vertical again with the spelling. We're going to give it top. Okay. And then you have these X and Y, and basically what that does is it just basically moves the legend around. So our X-axis, so it's basically going to move our legend along the X-axis, which is left to right, by 100 pixels, and our on our Y-axis, which is vertically, it's going to push it down 70. So it's going to push it to the right 100 pixels and push it down 70 pixels, and likewise negative, I believe, would be the opposite direction. Okay, so we're gonna do that. Our floating, so this is sort of like having position absolute in CSS. Okay, background color, we're gonna give it Highcharts.default options.chart.background color. Okay, Highcharts.default options, capital P there, .chart.background color. Okay, and you're gonna give it a border width of 1. Okay, let's save that. Let's go head over to our next line. Now we're gonna hit one called plot options. Okay. So plot options. All right, let's give this let's give it a property of scatter, because our chart's going to be a scatter. Okay, and inside the scatter option, we're going to do marker. Okay, let's give it an object. Basically, we're going to have our radius, and marker is basically like the actual representation of the data set on the plot, right? So we're going to have basically like circles, right? Just to show you. So like these are the markers here, these guys here. Okay. And we're going to have, we're going to give it some states. All right, so we give it a radius of 5 states. Let's give it a hover state. Not giver, hover. Enabled, true. Let's set it to true, and let's do line color, GB, 100, 100, 100. Okay. All right, so we just finished hover. Okay, so now let's move on to the next parallel to marker, which is states. Okay, so now let's give this an object. Inside that, let's do hover, and let's do marker, enabled. And all this is saying is, okay, when we hover over our marker, we basically just enable it. Pretty straightforward. Okay, and then last but not least, let's give it, well, not technically last, but let's give it a tooltip configuration. And tooltip is basically just, for those of you who don't know, this guy, when you hover over, you see the data. It basically represents the different data points that you're hovering over. Okay. So that's what Tooltip is, okay? And header format, and here we can give it some, just some custom HTML. We can just give it in a bold tag. We can give it a, and we're going to do curly braces because this is going to be basically dynamic coming in from basically the actual the name, right? So basically it's gonna be coming in dynamically from our configuration, from our data. Okay, so we're gonna do series, S-E-R-I-E-S, excuse me, that name. And then what we're gonna do here is just give it a break tag. We're gonna just hard code a break tag here. And what that's gonna do is, for our point format, it's gonna drop that onto a new line. Format, we're gonna do, again, quotes, and then we're going to do curly braces. We're going to do point dot x. Okay, again, point. So again, this is coming in from our Highchart configuration, and I'm not really sure where this point is coming from, to be honest with you. That could use a little further digging, but nevertheless, let's move on. Point dot y, and this also brings up a good point that you're not always going to understand everything that's going on, right? In like a third-party library, or reading somebody else's code, you kind of just have to basically pick up like the gist of it and just make it work, right? You got to figure out like on a high level like what's going on, and because if you try to understand every little thing, what's going to happen is you're gonna end up going down a rabbit hole. Okay, so now we're done. So series is going to be basically our data, right? And our data is what's coming in from here, which we're going to pass in. Okay. All right, guys. So now what we're going to do is we're going to actually, now since we've finished our entire Highcharts configuration, what we're going to do is we need to actually fetch the data from the c.json file. Okay. So what we're going to do is just put a comment, fetch data. Okay, we're going to use the fetch API. Okay, we're going to do HTTPS and ://127, and this is for localhost .0.0.1 :5500. Just enter your port number basically. Okay, and this is going to be /c.json. Okay, so this is basically again saying localhost /c.json. Okay, and then we're going to do .then, and we're going to take our we can do our response, and we're going to do response.json. We're going to convert it to JSON. Okay, and then after that, we're going to take our response. Actually, let's call this data. Let's call it data. And what we're going to do is we're going to store our data inside this guy called chart data. Okay, and why will be apparent very shortly. So basically, we're just setting our data into this variable, right? So now what we want to do is when the chart loads, this init chart function, we're going to pass in, we're basically going to invoke it. Okay, let's put our semicolon, and we're going to pass in an initial index of 0. The reason we do that is because when the chart initially loads, we want our first data set, which is female, which is this guy here, to load. Remember, this is an array with 2 objects inside it. Okay, object 1 and object 2, which is male. Okay, what we want to happen is basically we're going to select the first index. We're saying, hey, init chart, load our first index of our data, which is going to be in an array format, and that's going to be chart data and the first the element. Okay, and then we're going to do .catch. We're going to do let's do event, and we're going to do return the not events, excuse me, error. Okay, nothing loaded yet. Okay, so protocol error, we'll fix that one later. Okay, 127.0.0.1 5500, that's c.json. Oh, HTTPS, that's why. Okay, so now we have our our chart loaded. Okay, but because we selected our very first our very first index of our chart data, we want we're not going to have any functionality because we need to put event listers on this guy here. Okay, so now what we're going to do is, since we fetched the data, we're going to basically select this DOM structure, loop over it, and we're going to add an event listener to each of these guys through JavaScript. All right, so let's do that. All right, guys, since we fetched the data, now what we're going to do is let's go ahead and basically work on a button functionality. Okay, let t, okay, whatever. So what we're going to do is we're going to initialize a variable called ops wrapper, and what this is going to do is it's going to select document.get element by ID, and we're going to set this equal to our options wrapper dot children. Okay, that options wrapper again is this guy here, the wrapper that surrounds wraps our buttons. Okay, now dot children. Okay, so basically these are our buttons. Okay, dot children represents the actual child nodes of this DOM element, which is our options wrapper, this guy here. So these are the child nodes, the buttons. Okay, so next, after that, we're gonna take the very first one. So right, so out of our two that are currently present, two buttons, we're gonna do dot class list dot add, and we're gonna add a class called btn active, button active. And if we go to our CSS, button active is just basically gives a background color of blue, color of white, and with a transition of 0.4 seconds, which is pretty neat. Okay, nice little transition there. And this is going to be basically represent our default selected. Okay, so if we go back, okay, hold on. I had a little crash a few minutes ago. There we go. All right, there we go. And let's just inspect that. Okay, so if we right click and inspect our button, it now has a class of button active. Okay, so now since that, and just you get the point, right? This is basically representing like, hey, this is the very first, this is the default chart that loads on page load. Okay, so now what we're going to do is the actual button functionality. So we're going to loop over this. We're going to do for loop, and let's do ops wrapper dot length and I++, and inside here, so this is basically saying, hey, we're looping over our options wrapper container. Okay, this guy here. All right, and inside here we're saying ops wrapper I, for each one we're going to add an event listener of click. Okay, and we're going to pass an event inside, do our arrow function. Let's put our semicolon. Okay, now in here, let's do toggle charts. Basically what we're doing is now for each option here, basically each button, we're basically adding an event listener of click. Okay, so just to kind of show you, console.log e.target. Okay, and let's go to our console, and now we click on this button. So we get the first button, and now we get the second button. Okay, dataset 1, dataset 2. All right, perfect. This is exactly what we want. So now we're going to invoke our initChart function, which is going to basically redraw the function. And what we're going to do is we're going to pass in two things. The first is going to be the actual index. So we're going to say e.target.dataset.num, which represents the basic data attributes that we pass in. So remember I was showing you guys, and I said we'll come back to this. So basically through our JavaScript, when we click on each one of these buttons, we're selecting whatever index it is, whatever number it is, and we're using that as our index to basically go through the to basically sift into our seed.json array. So if we click on the first button, which is data number 0, that's saying, hey, pick the first element, which is the 0th index, which is our female, which is in this case our female object, the first element of this data array. Makes sense? But what's going to happen is, right now it's only going to load on it's only going to do this for if there is an index, right? So say we don't have an index, so we haven't clicked on one yet, we want there to be a default. Okay, so we're just going to say or 0. Okay, right, so that's that. And then now what we're going to do is we're going to pass in our chart data, which is basically going to be the selected index, right? So chart data, and then we're going to take the index of e.target dataset num. Okay, and this is basically representing it's making a new data structure of basically an array, and it's just basically using that array of one object. Every time you click, so say we click on dataset 2, it's going to take the index 1, and it's going to pass it in here, right? Basically here, it's saying, okay, chart data, get me the second element of that. All right, makes sense? Makes sense to me. And so that's that. And let's just test it out. Look at that. Perfect. Look at that. Flawless. Okay, dataset 2 is male. Dataset 1 is female. Very simple. But now notice that our buttons don't change color. So let's just do that real quick. And for this, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to use a little jQuery. So I could do this with vanilla too, but you know, in this case, it gets the point across active. So basically, for each one that's selected, each button that's selected, we're going to add a class called button active. Basically, what we did here on line 85, right? When the page loads, the very first button, we give it a selected class. So now all we're saying is, when we click on the first button, on any button basically, give it an active button class, and jQuery $ parentheses to event.target. So basically, whatever we click on, whatever button we click on, take its siblings as in, so the blue button here, right? Its sibling is dataset 2, which is this parallel button. It's a sibling in the node tree. So if I show you, if I inspect it, these are siblings here. This is the parent. This div here, which is options wrapper ID, this is the parent, and these are the children, right? So this is the brother, this is the sister. These are basically siblings. Make sense? And we're going to say for each sibling, we're going to remove class, and we're going to say button active. Okay, so when we click on a button, give it a class of active. Additionally, remove the class of button active from its siblings. Not it, but its siblings. All right, so let's test it out. Bam, bam. Look at that. Flawless. And that's all there is to it, guys. I highly recommend reading the API, the documentation before you get started. Very, very simple. Play around with these. They have different, this is awesome. Look at that. So play around with these, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.